watching and listening to the Farooki family campaigning for their father, that's the inspiration. I was asked earlier on today as to why do I feel it necessary to speak on this matter. Well, the answer is this. There have been people convicted in this country over the past many decades for terrorism. In fact, if you look during the 70s and the 80s, it wasn't the Muslims being convicted for terrorism, it was the Irish. And they were being convicted for terrorism during which 3,000 people were killed in this country. Now, bear that in mind, because what we're seeing right now, and particularly in the case of Farooki and many others, these are victimless crimes. You can't find that at this date, at this time, at this place, X, Y, and Z conspired together to harm another person. In fact, in this particular case, you'll find that the head of the counter-terrorism unit for the Northwest, Tony Porter, he said, "We did not recover any blueprint, attack plan, or end game for these men." In fact, he says their conviction was nothing to do with any attack plan or any terrorism in terms of physical violence. It was to do with ideology. It was to do with belief. Now here's a really important point, because just last year, or earlier this year rather, Sir Peter Fahy, who you would know is the head, the Chief Constable for Greater Manchester Police, he said that the police now were being asked to become thought police because of the new measures that the government's trying to introduce in terms of anti-terror legislation, but also extremism and how they determine that extremism. So you've got the head of Manchester Police saying that we are at the threat of becoming a police state, because our job as police officers isn't to judge and to seek to try to understand ideology. Our job is to protect the public from threats to their security, to their safety. And I'm sure you'll find in the case of Farooki, as you found in the case of the majority of terrorism arrests in this country, the police are quick to note, and you'll see this as a recurrent theme, there was no threat to the safety or security of the British public. Now how can this be? Constantly, if you've seen 11 pieces of anti-terror legislation have been passed over the past 14 years that have almost de facto been applied only to Muslims. And yet the majority of the people arrested and convicted, you'll find, never had an intention to harm a soul in this country. Now, this is not to say there haven't been people who have posed a threat to Britain from Muslim community and elsewhere. There are. But they don't have campaigns behind them. And that's the key issue. Why are these people, why are people constantly coming behind and standing behind Farooki? They know him as a person. He's known, his character's known amongst Muslims and non-Muslims. He's known in prison. When I was held in Belmarsh last year, his reputation preceded him as a man who was somebody who would make people laugh, somebody who would be very caring and kind towards other people, and as Mr. Pook has said, more concerned with other people's welfare than his own. So how could it be, if somebody wants to ask why you're campaigning for a convicted terrorist, let me ask you this. Whose statue do we have outside the Parliament building of a convicted terrorist? Nelson Mandela. He spent 27 years in prison in Robben Island and Polesmore prison and elsewhere, convicted as a terrorist. People could argue and say, well, Farooki, Mandela, two different people. True. What about all the other people that were convicted with Mandela? He wasn't convicted by himself. He was part of the ANC, a movement that saw and used the concept of armed struggle against an apartheid state. They were all released too and pardoned. In fact, they are now in power. Or they were in power until recently. So what does this all mean? Terrorism It becomes a tool to hammer a community simply because you don't like the fact that they're dissenting. We've seen it with the Irish before. And just remember also, Jerry Conlon, a good friend of mine who died last year, who knew, in fact, set up an organisation called the Miscarriages of Justice Organisation, because precisely of what happened to him and the Guildford 4 and the Birmingham 6 and the Maguire 7. They knew that these governments are concerned with interests, not with ethics and morals and what's right. Because if it was right, after 800 years, this year we're celebrating or commemorating 800 years of Magna Carta, of which only 3 clauses still remain that are relevant. And the most well-known, most pertinent clause is that to no man shall we deny justice or delay justice. Well, here we can see quite clearly in the case of Farooki and what's happening in general in the war against terror, that injustice has become the norm. It isn't just through the law courts and the politicians. It's every day you see it. When the co-chair of the leading Conservative Party, Baroness Warsi, who's part of the leading government that's in power, says that it is okay that Islamophobia has passed the dinner table test, means that you can sit down together at dinner with a family and discuss how horrible and evil those Muslims are. That's the state we are in this country. And before anybody says that we are preaching hatred and division amongst communities, let me be the first to say that Britain is the best place for Muslims to be in Europe. And that's why it's worse. That's why it hurts so much. Because we've seen it change. Racism used to be directed, and still is, to anybody that was foreign. But now it's specific to the Muslim community. And if you're a Muslim accused of any political dissent or political belief or ideas or ideology, then you're in for it. Then they'll have all sorts of contradictory measures placed upon you as a Muslim individual, despite the fact that the far-right terrorism that we've seen going on in this country, including quite recently, a young soldier called Ryan McGee, caught with 2 improvised explosive devices, which he said he'd added 187 pieces of nuts and bolts to have extra damage from the shrapnel. He had videos of beheading carried out by neo-Nazis in Eastern Europe. He had no surrender EDL flags. He had KKK literature. The judge in his case, knowing that he had held these views, these beliefs, this ideology, remember, and this tangible set of weapons, which Mani Farooki didn't have, the judge in his case refused to call him a terrorist. He was given 2 years, and this individual was in Manchester. Now think about this. Where's the justice? Where's the equality? Where is the rule of law? The very concept of Britishness that we're told that we don't adhere to, that if you don't adhere to the rule of law, then you're an extremist. Then if we're going to talk about the rule of law, then let's also widen it a little bit more. In my own case, but in the case of Shakir Amar, held in Guantanamo for 13 years without charge or trial, with full British knowledge and complicity, involved in the torture and rendition of their own citizens, of Britain's own citizens, let alone the carnage caused to the citizens of other countries in Iraq and Afghanistan. So how could it be that people are talking to us about, yes, this person is a terrorist, but this person isn't? This person we found just with a mindset, perhaps, maybe, encouraging people to go to fight in Afghanistan, if that's the truth, to defend against an occupation, which is a right under international law. And we've got this person over here, who's indigenous. But we found him with a cache of weapons and an ideology, that he's not a terrorist, he's just a confused teenager. So whose eyes are they trying to pull the wool over? Certainly not mine, and I really hope not yours. The problem that we're facing, I believe, right now, and I'm glad to see that the campaign for Munir Farooki is going to build up, is the fear factor. That everybody's told that if you campaign, if you speak, if you talk, if you look, if you support, if you give money, if you donate, if you shake hands in public, if you show any empathy towards somebody you believe has been treated unjustly, then they'll be after you. They'll be after you. But what we need to do is to look right back in their faces and say, we're also watching you right back. We know, we document, we list, we record, and we remember what you've been doing. Not just now to our community, the Muslims, because we're the cannon fodder of the day, but what you did in the past, and what you will by default do in the future against other communities if we don't stand with them. So my simple message is this: stand with the campaign for Munir Farooki, sign petitions, write to your MPs, say that this is a miscarriage of justice, it needs to be supported. This person does not, at best you can say, or that deserving 4 life sentences for something that after all was, as Harris explained, you couldn't get rid of the guys. They were constantly at their door, poking and prodding, forcing almost you to say something, and the moment you said it, they're there on you like a ton of bricks. So in the very least, rather, we should say that we should call for this sentence to be commuted. The very least. But in fact, if it's a miscarriage of justice, that by definition means they should be acquitted. Everybody involved in the case. And again, it's really important to remember when you're campaigning for somebody that's been convicted, that's the question everybody asks of you. How could you? You've gone through a legal process. But we've seen what the legal process is. We've seen what sort of legal representation Munir Farooki and the others received. We've seen that. So we need to ask again, and we need to say boldly and frankly and openly that Munir Farooki and those in prison with him require justice now. Thank you very much.